But here's the panel, followed by Q&A.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the closing panel we have here. We're going to talk about running DynamoDB at scale, and we've got a great panel here. I'm really excited about the guests. I'm Alex DeBrie. I do a lot of DynamoDB consulting. I guess maybe the rest of you all just introduce yourselves real quickly, starting with Esteban.
Thank you. My name is Esteban Cerna. I'm a principal DynamoDB specialist solution architect. I work at Amazon Web Services, and I make customers successful with DynamoDB.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shwetha Salunke. I run the product management team in New York for DynamoDB. And similar to Esteban, we are here to serve the customers. So we work backwards from the customers, and that's the product team's way.
Hi, everyone. My name is Talia Kohan. I'm a staff dev advocate here at Postman. And right now I'm working on Agent Mode. It's one of our brand new AI tools that Postman has announced. And I also help developers make their APIs AI ready.
Hey everybody, Liore Shai here. I'm a solutions architect with Eon. And at Eon, we do cloud infrastructure backup. And of course, one of the most popular services that we're backing up is DynamoDB, and helping AWS customers make their apps that are running on Dynamo more resilient.
Hey all, I'm Devarpi Sheth, distinguished engineer with Capital One, and currently focusing on developing platforms for my company, and have done a ton of work in serverless and Dynamo space. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Excited to have you all. I love the variety of perspectives we have here, right? Because we have some people from AWS and just talking about all the customers that they see. We have Talia, very passionate about APIs and AI and trends like that. And Leor, Eon's doing a bunch with backups in the DynamoDB and other AWS space. And then Devarpi, we have an actual large scale user of Dynamo, so we'll get some good perspective there. I just want to kick this off, maybe talking about resiliency, right? I think there's probably no better spot to talk about that, given hey, we just had an incident in AWS, and these things happen. They're few and far between for the most part, but I think when they do happen, it just gets everyone's mind thinking about how am I resilient to these things happening, and what should I be doing for my application? I guess maybe start with Esteban. What advice do you give to customers when they're thinking about resiliency around Dynamo and the rest of their applications? What factors should they consider? What features should they be looking at? And how do you counsel them around that?
In general, what we recommend customers, the most important thing is to analyze their requirements. You will think that it's very silly, but you will be surprised how many times I ask the questions. So what do you need? What are your RPO, RTOs? The normal questions that you ask. And they're well, I don't know. Then we have many options. The most resilient way that you can architect your DynamoDB workloads is to leverage global tables. You can have an active architecture where you can have a full copy of your data in another AWS region, for example, US East 1 and US West 1, for example. And every time you write into one of your regions, we will asynchronously, and nowadays with strong consistency global tables in a strong consistent way, you can also replicate your data to the destination region. So that's an amazing way to do it. That will give you redundancy at the database layer, but it is not the only way you do it. So maybe the most difficult portion of this question is customers only want to maybe replicate the database, but they forget about the rest of the layers. So if you have your database in one region and for some reason you cannot access that region anymore, there is nothing to do to have database in that region. So we also ask you to think about the other layers in your application and to actually have the stack in your other region. Please don't consider this as a blanket statement. You really need to identify what you actually need, because if you can tolerate 1 week downtime, then you have many options versus a customer that can tolerate only 5 seconds downtime. So with DynamoDB, we also have some options like incremental export to S3. You can take snapshots with DynamoDB and restore them. So there are options, and they all depend on what are your needs.
Yeah, I agree. I love that nuanced perspective where it's hey, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I think if you look on LinkedIn and Twitter the last month, people have been saying, hey, this is why you have to be multi-region and all this sort of thing, without realizing that's a lot of complexity, that's a lot of cost. Even if you architect that way, it's hard to know like where that blast radius is going to be within AWS to where you can even fail over for some of that stuff. So like it's a hard problem to be truly multi-region, and it's worth asking again, like what are your requirements around that? Go ahead.
Actually, before we move,
yeah,
something that I like to say a lot: we don't have to be black and white.
Yep.
It's not like all in or nothing. You can also classify your data. If I have maybe 5 tables or 5% of my workload is critical, that might be enough for having an active solution in there. And then you can have layers based on that. So you as a customer really have to have that exercise and identify the criticality of your data and make a decision accordingly. Because
yep, absolutely. And maybe Devarpi, like if you could give us some perspective from an actual customer use case, do you have certain rules and guidelines within Capital One of like, hey, this sort of criticality needs to be global table, maybe even active, maybe like multi-region strong consistency, or like how do you think about resiliency and especially global tables with Dynamo?
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, resiliency, not only Capital One, right? Everybody is going to think about resiliency, and it's like non-negotiable these days for many reasons. The speed at which your customers want the new features, to the tolerance towards the failure. From Capital One perspective, we kind of have a number of platforms that kind of are born now platinum, we call it, and it's across multiple regions, and we are even raising the bar over there, where we are going in some of the critical areas with active approach as well. So yeah, there is great variety, and as Esteban mentioned, you start with like database, but you don't want to forget your API and even higher layers, right? So detection point is a critical point as well, where you detect the failure and kind of route your request to different region or different setup APIs and whatnot. So those are all the key ingredients we do take care as well.
Yep, absolutely. And staying on the topic of resilience, but switching tack a little bit, I guess, Leor, like backups are a huge part of resiliency. Like that's what you all do at Eon and really taking off there. I guess like I can speak from experience, always having a backup policy, but not always knowing my restore policy works. Like, how do you work with customers to like, help them think about implementing restores or testing that, making sure that works without blowing up their existing system, but also giving confidence when there is an issue, hey, I can restore correctly?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. I think one of the things that's really important when it comes to thinking about backups of cloud infrastructure, and especially something like DynamoDB, I like to kind of talk about disentangling the concept of backup from DR overall when it comes to resiliency. So when we think about it, there's so many tools that are available, with DynamoDB out of the box. Like you can enable point-in-time recovery on the table. You can do, scheduled backups, right, full snapshots of that DynamoDB table. And one of the things is, right, if you're doing something like global tables or PITR on DynamoDB, you have that resiliency from the standpoint of, right, you can recover to a particular point in time. Or right, whatever writes that you're making are going to be persisted to another region in a kind of active way. But one of the things that might be missed or lost there in an overall strategy when it comes to backups is this idea of having a kind of copy of your data that's available from a business continuity perspective in an air-gapped environment, right? So meaning that critical data is essentially being copied off-site somewhere where it's outside of the blast radius of the things that you're protecting it against. And from a business continuity perspective, it's really important to be able to have that restorable copy of your data. Because if you think about in AWS, right, one of the things that we've always kind of practiced or used to work at AWS, and even today when we're thinking about architecting there, it's a delete is a delete, right? So if you delete your table, if it's not backed up, right, that table is gone, and then that point in time recovery, even though it would have been useful when the table existed, is kind of no longer. So it's really important to think about that, and whether it's using something like Eon, which can enable those automatic snapshots of your DynamoDB table, or using something like S3 incremental export, or snapshots with AWS backup. It's really important to differentiate that strategy from a business continuity perspective. When it comes to the restores, I think it's important to realize, in if you have your backups of DynamoDB tables, what is your plan, right, for being able to actually recover that database? If it's a large, 20, 30 terabyte DynamoDB table, is part of your process restoring, the full table, which can take, an unknown amount of time, right, depending on the size of the table and the data structure. So I think that's one of those things that Eon kind of helps with, because we enable you to restore the full table from DynamoDB, as well as granular restores, right? So if you need a subset of the items from the DynamoDB table, that actual backup is indexed. So you can, for example, run a query on that database using Athena in order to prove that a subset of your data is actually available for restore without restoring.
Yeah, interesting. Do you see people like running analytical queries on that as well? Having that full backup where, hey, Dynamo's not great for analytical queries, but now I can get like some counts using Athena on my backup data.
Yeah, it's a really common use case as well, because if you think about it, let's say you're implementing the strategy where you say, I want to make sure, right, again, I might be using, and we recommend our customers to, if you have that need for, kind of point-in-time recovery, to use point-in-time recovery from DynamoDB. But let's say for a compliance or governance reason, there's a need to have like weekly snapshots of every database in the organization. So across 10,000 DynamoDB tables, you're taking snapshots with a tool like Eon. One of the things you can actually do is query, any of those databases, so the count of items, the size of the database, and you can actually run queries using Athena, via Eon to understand things about that database. So other cool things people have been doing is things like implementing an MCP server on top of that. So basically, you can ask things to DynamoDB tables without the need to actually restore any of them.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, I want to talk, that's a great segue into like the next thing. I want to talk about like some application design and trends. And Talia, like I know you're passionate about like AI and especially like APIs and building for AIs, which are like the new users of APIs in some sense. I guess like how is designing and testing APIs for AI users, AI agents different than human users?
It's completely different. I mean, you have to think of a completely different subset of AI. And basically, there's a checklist that we have at Postman. Your APIs need to have machine consumable metadata. They have to have really rich error semantics. So like, for example, if you get this error like 404, something went wrong, but there's no details, like when a human developer sees this, like I have experience of what to do. Like I might check if a user ID exists, if I have permission to the resource, if I formatted the request correctly. I'll have like implicit knowledge about, what's going on. But an AI system doesn't have any of this intuition. Like it doesn't just know that something went wrong might mean user ID or permissions or does the resource exist. So instead, you would want to have like expected and received. So like this is what we expected and this is what we received. So it's like super clear to the machine. And I think like once the AI agent like learns enough about your API and how your team and your APIs work, I think that's when you get the best results, and just being like as clear as you can be. And then the other thing is making your APIs discoverable. So like if we take a step back, like AI agents don't just like know things. Like they don't know how to like do things. They can't schedule things. They can't, do things on their own. They call APIs. So if your APIs are not discoverable by the AI agents, like you're not going to be able to, the AI agents won't use your APIs. So making them discoverable, posting them on something like the Postman API network, which is like a huge network of APIs that are available for agents. Those are some of the key things.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess like on that same note, Shwetha, like what are you seeing? I know I talked to Dynamo people that are using Dynamo for their AI applications. Do you see a difference in like Dynamo usage from these AI-driven workloads? Like maybe they're burstier, maybe they're like larger items because you got big long chat messages or something like that. Like, do you see a difference in the AI driven applications that are building on Dynamo, or are they pretty similar?
Definitely, there is a huge difference. And like you pointed out, right, burst capacity comes into play quite a bit. because the traditional applications, when you look at them, these are used by humans, and human usage follows a pattern, a daily, weekly cycle. But AI workloads can have irregular burst patterns, which can be triggered by model inference or batch processing, right? So now it becomes even more important for customers to lean on demand, which is our serverless offering, where you don't have to worry about burst capacity planning. In some cases, there is also a ramp up and ramp down of human traffic that we can actually predict with traditional workloads. But with AI, again, it's really not understandable like what the pattern can be, and we are also learning as we go with this, and as our customers adopt and grow their AI application. And yeah, the last one, definitely, like the item sizes need to be watched. For sure, context windows, and basically the amount of data that needs to be stored and accessible with queries needs to be in a particular pattern, right? And that sometimes will need DynamoDB, and sometimes we'll need S3, for example. So it really depends on the type of data and which database or which storage is more suitable for what.
Yeah, for sure. I love that Bursty point. Like I remember I was talking with someone that runs like a new sort of CI/CD solution, and like really targeted towards AI agents, honestly. And he was talking about just like how bursty their workload is when like the new day kicks off, because everyone wakes up, they see all these issues, they sort of like have their AI agents go, and then they test in that environment and do a lot of CI/CD there. And it's just like their need for CI environments are 100x or more higher right away at the beginning of the day than they were overnight. So like very, very big spikes there. I guess like I've always been fascinated by the split in the Dynamo community between like there are these huge users of Dynamo, Amazon.com retail and like Disney and like all these ones that have these huge OLTP needs. And then there's also like sort of the environment where I came from, where it's like I love serverless, I love Lambda, I love using Dynamo with Lambda and how it works there. So like on that same point, like you're product manager, like how distinct are the needs for these two users? Is it hard to like build stuff that works for both of them, or are they actually like fairly unified in what they're looking for?
So there are similarities and there are differences. First, let's go with the similarities, right? Both types of customers have a need for which they're coming to DynamoDB, which is scale and predictable performance, right? So those are definitely common. In the first case of enterprise customers, actually, we had like 2 product advisory councils recently in 2 different locations, and we saw the more distinct use case split there, right? How I would put it is basically the maturity of these customers on DynamoDB. The larger customers would definitely be worrying more about, cost per operation and trying to optimize how they're using DynamoDB. Even, in some cases, they need to even change the data model to be more efficient. Whereas the customers who are more leaning towards, the serverless aspects of DynamoDB and leaning more towards a growing phase within their company and growing phase of DynamoDB usage, they're more interested, and what we see is they're more interested in understanding what the new features are and how they can basically grow their workloads on DynamoDB using these new features. So a variety of feature requests from those customers is what I see.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned on-demand burst billing for like AI-driven applications. Hey, like one of the biggest announcements of the last couple of years was the huge price cut for on-demand last year. So I guess, Esteban, are you seeing a lot more customers like move to on-demand given that price cut? Hey, I think it was cut in half now. So it's like it really opens up, I think, on-demand to a lot more customers. Is that what you're seeing with users you're talking to?
100%. So one of the similarities that I see customers, large or small customers, is that they want us to do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
So when they can relax about the provisioning portion of the equation, they are more freely working on their applications. So the on-demand price cut was a really differentiator, because now I see actually a lot of customers just defaulting to on-demand. And that's what we recommend, actually, because if you don't know how your application is going to behave, just put your table in on-demand. Now it's 50% cheaper, and you can learn about your application. If after you test a couple of months, you see that there is a common pattern, maybe consider moving to provision. But we have seen a lot of customers just staying in on-demand because, as Shwetha mentioned, if you have a bursty day or an activity or weekend, on-demand will just be able to handle everything like that. So it really simplifies their life.
Yeah, I agree. I always used to tell people use on-demand until it hurts, and now like the threshold to where it hurts has doubled, right? It's much higher. So like, I just love that. I guess, Leor, as we talk about these different like segments of customers, where at Eon are you like seeing adoption of the backups? Like, is it those larger scale customers? Is it more like a price thing? Is it a feature thing? Like, where are you like seeing interest from the DynamoDB community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really great question because I think we have some customers at Eon that we work with that where adoption of DynamoDB is, let's say, on the lower side, more focus on EC2 and those kind of legacy workloads, and ranging from all the way to where there's really strong adoption of DynamoDB for the most critical applications. And so what we see is in customers that are really strong users of DynamoDB, it's usually a range of different use cases. So, might have, a couple hundred tables where there's a couple kilobytes of data and less, and then several tables going into the 100+ terabyte range. And so one of the really nice things about Eon is it enables these companies where, as long as, however they want to define their data protection, policies, their backup policies, they can basically ensure that they have a cohesive strategy that's applying across all of their databases. So let's say, if there's a particular compliance requirement at a company where all of our, tier one or however you're describing your application tiers, databases need to be backed up with a certain frequency and retention. You can apply that uniformly across hundreds of AWS accounts and thousands of DynamoDB tables, along with your RDS databases as well and clusters. So that's where we kind of see it is across the board when customers have some type of compliance requirement for keeping backups. And then they also want to say, I could be running my DynamoDB tables in different regions depending on the application and, some cases using global tables. So being able to actually be very intentional with which particular tables you need to back up and how. And so we enable you to kind of roll out that strategy at scale. And so I think, like to the point we said before, we have a lot of customers that do leverage, point-in-time recovery or even incremental export. And that works really well. But then once customers kind of get into the stage where they might have a really large number of tables that are critical to them and they want to roll out strategy, we help them kind of scale and make sure that those tables are backed up according to
it. Awesome. Okay, Devarpi, I love customer use cases. I want to hear some war stories from you. You work at Capital One. You worked at some places that are like big Dynamo users. I guess, like, can you tell us any applications you worked on where either maybe you like had a hard problem that was like hard to solve, whether that's read heavy, write heavy. Maybe you had something that you thought was going to be hard to scale and it wasn't. Any interesting stories you can tell us from applications you've run on Dynamo?
Oh yeah, a number of them. I can start with like some of the customer facing ones where customer, after they heard what we are unlocking for them, kind of they were dancing in their chair. So we had a platform where in the past where I used to work, there was a feature called custom fields. Customer will come in and define their custom fields. In the traditional world, database with SQL and deployed in your data center, they will get limits saying, oh, you cannot have more than X amount of custom fields. Versus when we said, okay, now the new platform that we are designing will give you pretty much endless custom field. Guess what? What was powering that, right? That's our DynamoDB tables behind the scene powering that. And they were like super excited. I started early in 2013 with my first Dynamo application with identity use case. And I always remember this, and I will bring up every time I talk about Dynamo. Those days, like 3,000, like 200, 300 TPS is a big thing. And we were suddenly like scaling at 3,000 TPS for our identity system. And everything worked seamlessly when we rolled out that. And my CEO at that time kind of, presented that in reInvent as well. 2 engineers got mad and designed this on serverless DynamoDB approach. And now we are cranking up like crazy. to now, we are actually, the talk of the town is resiliency as well, right? So we have designed number of resiliency patterns which are backed by DynamoDB. Circuit breaker comes in my mind, where you rely on third-party vendor system, but they are not keeping up with your infrastructure scale that you are gonna deal with. So there are real limitations you're gonna face at that time. So you want to have graceful experience for your end user. So circuit breaker is another great pattern that came. To now distributed system that we have, where you have multiple databases, different type of databases, or even Dynamo, you can have 15 microservices empowering a platform. And each purpose-built database has their capabilities, which you want to use them for. Fuzzy search is not DynamoDB capability, right? So we inevitably will have multiple databases, but you have primary database and secondary database, which are like Dynamo and let's say OpenSearch. How do you keep them in sync? How do you design that lightweight programmatic syncing? We use an atomic counter feature of that, where anytime you create or update, you up the counter by 1, and you synchronize you down the counter by 1. Anytime your counter is not 0, you know that you have a trouble. Now just take data from primary and slap it on secondary database. But that is all happening automated behind the scenes. So those were like crazy use cases that I can think about. I can go on and on. In the interest of time, I would just yield back my time.
It is, but I appreciate it. Like, it's fun to see like those cases where you're like, hey, it scaled way easier than I expected it to, or like, hey, we had this previous limit and now we don't have that. Like, I love all those stories. Switching gears a little bit and going back, I know Leor talked about MCPs earlier. Talia, you've talked about a bunch about MCPs. I'm coming to you as the expert here. Like, what are some best practices for data protection with MCPs? Because I see like, fears about leakage and stuff. Like, how do you get enough access to be useful, but not so much that it's leaking or sort of cross-filtering or infiltrating customer data all over the place?
Yeah, so I think what most people don't know about MCP is that it's highly configurable. So you can give your developers control over how your models interact with different external systems, and you can explicitly define the tools that are available to the model. And each MCP tool comes with its own schema that specifies like what can be read, what can be written, what can be executed. And you just make sure that like every data interaction is intentionable and auditable, and no one has access to things that they shouldn't have. And so when you have these boundaries, it allows for like you said, control. And also you're following the principle of least privilege, right? So you can only access specific tools and specific things that you want the LLM to be able to access. And you can configure your MCP server so that the model only has access to the minimal set of data and actions that it needs to perform whatever task you're doing.
Yep. Interesting. It makes me think of like, Dynamo, you can do like fine-grained access controls on like IAM policies that you have there. So even just like before you call that out, maybe you say you give it in a key or something like that only has access to certain customers' data or something like that. So you could do something like that, which is pretty interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Let's move a little bit into like fast round. I got a few different questions here, but Esteban, Shwetha, especially, what is the most underrated DynamoDB feature? Do you have one?
I would say point-in-time recovery any day.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to turn on, and it gives you so many benefits. So definitely, like, we still see customers not using it, and that is where resiliency and having a backup is really important. So we provided a really good feature for it, but it is definitely underutilized.
Yep. And are you mostly seeing that like, hey, we pushed a code change that actually like messed up some of our data, we need to roll back 2 days? Or like, what is that sort of the actual like usage of the point in time? Hey, I actually need to restore from this point in time. Where does that come up most often?
Yeah, you don't need point-in-time recovery till you need it. That's basically how it works, right? So it could be any sort of like unintentional table deletion, any type of wrong data or wrong access that has been provided, or some sort of application error itself. all of those for the last 35 days, you can restore to any point in time, which I think is a very powerful feature to have for any database. So yeah, I think like most customers can find this useful, and they'll find it useful the day that they will need it. So yeah.
I have two in that front, which is actually powered by point-in-time recovery. So I like a lot incremental export to S3. Exactly because of the same reason Shwetha is telling me. We can restore the table to any point in the last days, but what happens if I only need to change? I know that I push some small code that needs only a few modifications. So you can actually take, using incremental export to S3, grab your window where you make the change, grab the delta, analyze what you did, and then go and fix it in the DynamoDB table. So it's an easier way to do it. I have seen very little customers using it. I don't know why. I love it. I recommend it a lot. And my second one, it is, I forgot the name. I have it. Contributor insights for throttle keys only.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because you can go and see which keys you're being throttled on. So you don't really have to worry about, so do I have to enable contributor insights and have all of these fees? With throttle keys only mode, you can just see where you're throttled. So that's amazing. You can actually see. So if you have the question, what is my partition key that I'm being throttled? You can have the answer right away. And it's going to be very cheap. I actually recommend anyone that has a production workload, enable contributor insights, keys, throttle keys only, like leave it on, because we only charge for the throttles. Unless you're being throttled 100% of the time, it's going to be very expensive. But if not, you have a really secret weapon over there.
A good look at that. Yeah, for sure. Okay, that leads me to another question I wanted to ask you. Like, because Dynamo is so predictable, it has so few knobs. Like when I talk to people, they're always like, what metrics should I watch and things like that. And it's like, well, they're just like not a ton to watch. So I guess like, are there some other CloudWatch metrics that you say for Dynamo? Like, hey, really keep an eye on these. You mentioned contributor insights, but like, what do you recommend people monitor for their DynamoDB table metric wise?
So if you are in on-demand mode, there is not really much. I mean, you can monitor, but everything is really managed for you. You should definitely keep an eye on throttles. That's very important because you can be in throttle because of some application traffic, and maybe you can do something about it. Or maybe it can be some bad design practice. Maybe you initially designed your application for 1,000 users, and now you are supporting 100 million. It's a very different application, right? So that might help you identify if you have to go deeper. If you are in provision mode, you really have to keep an eye on utilization. That means how much capacity you're actually consuming. With provision mode, you need to keep a buffer in the provision capacity units, a threshold utilization. The higher the number, the less room we have to react for change in traffic. So you need to find that balance. That's what I will monitor the most.
Yep, I agree. And it's that one, especially utilization. I always say, hey, obviously be monitoring that day to day and understanding that. But every month you should be looking at that and saying, hey, am I hitting that 28.8% threshold of utilization to where it makes sense to do provision rather than on demand? Because if you're not hitting that threshold, like you should really just switch to on demand and get the easiness of that.
I have another, because it's a really quick fix if you want to save money on DynamoDB.
There we go.
Monitor if you're actually reading from your global secondary indexes. You will be surprised how many times I go to a customer discussion and I ask, what is this index about it? Okay, someone created it. This is 100 terabyte tables. You are projecting everything and you are not using it. Just go and delete it. Make sure that you have an alarm on read utilization on your indexes. If that number is close to 0 or less than 5%, something is really small, then delete the index and save that money.
Like honestly, all these points, I just love with Dynamo, like if you feel like you're spending too much money, every month you should be looking at this stuff. But even like if you're just like, where's our money going? You can actually see like, oh, it's going to writes to this index. Can we optimize that in some way? It's going to reads. It's whatever it is. Like we have a ton of storage or a ton of backups. Like whatever it is, you can find it, and then you can decide. You can like make that trade-off very easily of like, hey, are we getting the value we want from this, or can we optimize that index in something? Remove that index in this case, or maybe rebuild it, project fewer attributes into it, whatever you want to do there. Devarpi, what about you? Like in terms of monitoring, do you have a philosophy on like proactive versus reactive alerting? Like, are you alerting just on customer facing metrics? Like, hey, this API was actually slow for my customer, their errors, or are you alerting on like infrastructure metrics like Dynamo throttles or things like that? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so reactive is always not so good. I would put it that way. So we always believe in proactive monitoring, and as Esteban and Shwetha was talking about matrices, we do observe all those and we have created a matrix out of it. And those alerts are today going definitely to our teams, and in some scenarios going to the central team that can publish to customer when needed. Now, in my opinion, all the metrics, I love the one which, Esteban, you mentioned, because I've used it to my benefit in the performance test, where we were suddenly seeing some usage pattern which didn't expect, hotkeys to be there. So all the metrics that Dynamo has provided, especially we call it advanced metrics, they are super helpful, and that helps us to stay ahead of the game. I love on demand again. And always build something that kind of keeps you ahead of the failure if possible. So we have matrix at not only Dynamo, but every layer, if you will. And then there is a fallback plan for every layer, understanding that how that should react at individual layer, whether it is API or it is API gateway or even Dynamo later.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, last couple questions here. I think AWS is working at its best when it has like a symbiotic relationship with like the third-party stuff just built around it, right? And I think Eon's a great example where they're providing these additional backup features that Dynamo doesn't have. And then also Dynamo, I think, plugs in really well where it's like, hey, it's really good at these certain things. It also has DynamoDB streams and exports and things like that where you can get data out and integrate with other systems as you want. So I don't know if any of you will have an answer here, but just in case, is there a single area where you currently recommend a product that like works really well, augments DynamoDB, maybe outside the AWS ecosystem, that you like recommend to people, solves a thing, or even like wish someone would solve that gap for you today?
I have one. So maybe this is bigger than DynamoDB, but I think one of the concerns most of our customers have AWS-wide is how do we look at our costs across accounts? And this becomes a bigger problem when we have like partners who have, an account or a table for each end customer. And then you're not able to monitor costs across your entire portfolio as such. So I think there are a few, third-party tools that have made this possible, but I think there's a long way to go there, where you're basically able to, get all of these metrics related to your costs, or even related to like, who's accessing what across your entire portfolio, across multiple accounts.
I can give n number of requests. Begin with, we have seen DynamoDB used in really heavy read use case, right? And it scales very well. There are so many techniques and levers you can pull, right? Sharding to logical GSI, and you name it. The write heavy use cases where I think Dynamo can really help further. DynamoDB has figured out a couple of things very well. Number one, number of new connections that you can create every second, and which is great. And now you have partitioning logic and all that stuff, but that is limited to a table. Can you create kind of endless partition where I'm not hitting those right limits of 1,000 WCU per transaction? And I have some design in my head, which I'm working on. But if Dynamo can organically solve that, where you can have endless partition, that right use case will be a big game changer, to be very honest.
Yeah. All right. Hey, we're coming up on time here. Last question I want to ask is just about reInvent. reInvent's coming up around the corner. I'm guessing a lot of you will be there. I hope to see some of you there. Any recommendations? It can be specific sessions. It can be specific types of sessions. Hey, look out for these, or just even like, hey, how do you get the most out of reInvent if you're going for this? Go to the keynotes or do the hallway track or whatever it is. I guess what are some recommendations that folks have for reInvent?
One of the sessions that I think is very interesting is an insider's look into the architecture choices that DynamoDB has made. And I think it's presented by two of our senior principal engineers. And I think, they know everything there is about all the choices that are made and why exactly they're made. When they were made. So I think it's very interesting to listen to that story and see how DynamoDB evolved to what it is right now. Other than that,
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. I was gonna say I love that. I love those. I think Dynamo is one of those things where like you just need to know a little bit about the architecture to understand how it works and then how the API works on top of that, and it makes just so much more sense to you. I think the people that struggle to learn Dynamo, they don't learn like just those basic concepts about just like why it works this way. I think it just completes a puzzle. Amrit does a great job with those. Yeah, that's a great talk.
And
I'll also say just like make sure that you ask a ton of questions. Like if you go to a talk, like when I spoke at reInvent a few years ago, like when you go to a talk, like after the talk, like go to the speaker and ask a ton of questions. Like that's why they're there, especially if you have like specific use cases or maybe things that weren't exactly covered. Like those speakers and the people there are there to help you. So don't be shy, like ask a ton of questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. And I'd say, Eon, we're going to be there. And so please, stop by our booth and also check out our CTO. Ron is going to have a joint session with SoFi. So if you're interested in learning more about what we're doing for our AWS customers and even just want to talk about data protection for AWS and DynamoDB, please find me there. So looking forward to seeing you.
Awesome.
There is one last session that I really want to highlight. We have been working with the DynamoDB MCP server, and we're trying to extract the solutions architect's mind into a prompt that can help you with data modeling. So we're going to have a session dedicated to that, where you can experiment with the DynamoDB MCP server and see how this is going, and you can give us all the feedback that you can have in there.
Awesome. Yep, I've seen that tool. It's great. It's a lot of fun and very useful to work on.
As a customer, I always would request one thing which kind of excites me. Under the hood, anything new that you guys can share, how it works under the hood, it helps design well. It helps to kind of choose the right solution for the right problem well, because you have deep understanding at that time. So that is always I look for. And I always look for one new technology to learn when I go to reInvent. So,
yeah. Great advice. Hey, great panel. This was great. I appreciate you all. We got, it looks like 10 minutes for live questions. So let's switch over to that. But yeah, thank you all for coming.
All right. Thank you everyone for hanging in there. We're a little over time, but we'll try to stick to at least 10 minutes or less. Try to do a lightning round with all our awesome experts. You can turn all your cameras on. Once all the cameras are on, we'll go live. Your last chance to get your questions in. So let's do it. All right. I see pretty much everyone. We're about to go live. Let's go. Hey, welcome experts to DynamoDB Day.
Hey, thank you. Good to be here. Good to see everyone again.
Good to see everyone. Awesome stuff. Getting a lot of comments here. Let's just, like I said, we're a little over time. I'll try to, watch the time, but let's get some questions really quick. DynamoDB backups always restore to a new table. Does Ion backups, can they restore into an existing table so that the service does not need to be updated? And I don't know, you're on mute. I don't know if that's...
You probably know the best about that one.
So, I think great question. So, here I am. Okay. I'm sorry. I might be delayed a little bit, but now I got this. Okay. Okay, perfect. So essentially, if we think about Eon backups, we're able to take that table, and then you can essentially do as part of IAC, you can initiate the backup via our Terraform provider or using our REST API. So what that means is, as part of a single workflow, you can also, implement your own backup, and then separately update your ISC, but in a multi-step workflow, but all as part of the same module. So that's something that we could dive into together. So please feel free if you want to, get in touch and go more into that.
Excellent. All right. So outage scenarios can be unpredictable. I mean, we just had one with Cloudflare. I'm glad this didn't happen yesterday. What's your go-to strategy for keeping DynamoDB workloads resilient across regions? Anyone feel free to jump in?
I can add here.
Great.
I think global table is the way to go as far as you're looking for resiliency. Look for carefully, like, do you need the strong consistency? Then that is even going to raise the bar here for you. And that way, at least you're isolating within the region. That would be my first choice, to stay within the DynamoDB ecosystem. That's how far I've gone, to be very honest. But if it is API interaction with some, like, multiple APIs and all that stuff, queuing is something that I've done, at least for the, write capture, where it was done for different kind of database, but DynamoDB was used for storing that, persisting that messages, and then replaying it and all that stuff. So you can use Dynamo as a backup for other type of APIs or databases as well. I hope that answers.
So why is the user errors CloudWatch metric not table specific, like system errors?
So I don't really have 100% answer on this one, and that might be something that we will need to explore later. But the difference between system errors and user errors is, on system errors, it is something that at the DynamoDB service level happen. For example, if you're splitting a partition, you will get a system error. That's one of the examples. You can always retry and keep working with your application. It goes. User errors is more on the application side, I guess. So.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising to me. I guess there's like some of them that are not table specific. Right, if you try and do something against a table that doesn't exist, yeah, it's kind of surprising to me that you can't get, like, something else. Although, yeah, really, you probably should be alerting in your code somewhere if you're getting those sort of errors.
All right. Beyond PITR and full snapshots, what additional layers of backup or resilience would you recommend for teams that need stronger guarantees?
I think, I could speak to that from a general data protection perspective.
Sure.
So if we think about it, I mean, even if you look at any type of cloud workload, we have a lot of customers that are looking at and saying, do we have our actual backups that are stored in an air-gapped environment? That's one. Right? So that means if it's usually air-gapped in connectivity in general, but in the cloud, we're talking about a logical air-gap, where it's either in a separate account or a separate organization. And then another one is the actual encryption backup. So one recommendation that we have at Eon is that the actual backed up data is going to be encrypted with a different key than the source data. And it's all about having a strategy where your backups are outside of the blast radius of the things that you're trying to protect.
A couple of things to add there, right? Like there are very simple things that you can add on to protect your tables. One is just turning on deletion protection. It's a very simple feature, but it has helped a lot of our customers avoid, table deletions, which were unintended. There's also an understanding of reviewing your user access and making sure that it's least privilege, right? So having any user have the least amount of access possible will help you avoid any sort of mistakes, whether it is like actively done or made by mistake. It's going to be avoided completely if you have least privilege access.
I would say if you're really looking for further, resiliency point of view, look at cell architecture. That could be another way of thinking, which does cover from your compute to data layer isolation. And that can help improve the resiliency posture as well.
Excellent. What is the cutoff start looking at? What is the cutoff you start looking at rebuilding indexes, backfilling an index after creation?
Yeah, this question is a little bit, it might have different answers. So DynamoDB global secondary indexes doesn't work like traditional databases index. We don't create indexes for performance. So we create index because we want to get a different access pattern from what I have in the base table. So if my base table is based by user ID and I have to ask questions about organization ID, I create the index on org ID. We do that once, and behind the scenes, an index is just a different DynamoDB table that is connected behind the scenes. So we keep that index in sync. However, having said all of that, if you have an existing table, let's say 100 terabytes or a couple of gigabytes, when you create the index, we do have a backfill process. And you will have in the AWS console, you will see that your table is updating, and you can only use the index when it's in active state.
Excellent. All right, probably have time for one last question. I want to respect everyone's time. Can backups be restored to an existing table? Today, we do this with Glue and AWS backups.
Yeah, so that's the default way that the DynamoDB handles backup. We always restore to a new table. And if you want to work into your existing table, that you will have to create that custom process with Glue right into the original table.
Yeah, and what one area there that I think we talk about, like Esteban said, one of the areas that we can help with Eon is we have a similar process, right, where your backups in Eon are queryable using Athena. So they're stored in S3, and you can query them with Athena. So you could actually create a workflow using the Eon REST API, where you can write data from Eon backup into an existing DynamoDB table. But I think, like you mentioned, there's a number of ways with AWS to build out that workflow.
Love it. Well, I want to thank you once again for contributing to DynamoDB Day. Before we go, though, I want to get one piece of quick advice from each one of you to get the most out of what you think people should take away. Shwetha, any parting words of wisdom?
Yep. From my side, I think, DynamoDB is always looking to evolve. So one of the things that we ask from our customers is always provide us feedback. We are always listening to you and trying to improve our roadmap. So make sure you're, talking to someone in DynamoDB, your account managers, or even reach out to product managers if you had any feedback.
Love it. Devarpi, any final thoughts?
I feel going deep into any technology, right? Let alone like DynamoDB. That is one thing that has helped me to grow in my professional career. So any technology that you work on, just try to go deep into that. That will automatically take you to the resiliency, take you to the customer focus approach, and how you solve the problem. So that would be that's how I operate. So that would be my advice as well here.
Great advice. How about you, Leor?
I think overall, when it comes to approaching these, I think it's the really nice thing about working with AWS is that, and especially serverless technology like DynamoDB, it's really easy to try things. So in the spirit of what Devarpi is just saying, get out there, create a table, try some of the things that we've been talking about, whether it's point-in-time recovery, restores, backups, And that's the beauty of it. You don't have to invest a whole lot of time and financial resources to actually get your hands on these tools.
Perfect. Esteban.
Yeah, I guess my recommendation is to treat DynamoDB data modeling as an iterative process, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. At any data processing, it will take you iterations until you get into a place that you say, it is good enough. I'm going to move with this one.
Great. And Alex, final words.
Yeah, they stole a lot of mine, but I would say maybe take an hour and learn a little bit about Dynamo's architecture. Like there's some great reInvent talks last year. Amrit Kumar, this year he's doing the same thing. And just like understanding just enough of Dynamo's architecture, I think really helps you with your data modeling, performance, billing, all just like you really understand how the whole thing works if you just take an hour to like get those foundations. So I would say invest the time in doing that.
Well, thank you again, experts, so much. Appreciate you all. Talk to you later. Cheers. Thank you.